Following the immense success of The Fib from Outer Space and The Rumor Weed, you would assume that the series would continue strong. And you'd be partially right. In 2002, LarryBoy would return in a 2D animated series, although this didn't happen because it was something people actually wanted. LarryBoy fans wanted a 3D animated VeggieTales episode, another epic Batman-inspired work that you couldn't stop watching. No, this series came about because Big Idea needed it to. To truly understand what brought about the LarryBoy animated series, we'll have to go back to the business decisions that surrounded the previous showing, LarryBoy and the Rumor Weed. In the year 1999, Big Idea was falling apart. The ever-increasing divide between Christian and non-Christian artists was coming to a head, as managers were getting burnt left and right trying to keep the company together. It got so bad that there was a period with no management at all. Even amongst the management themselves, there was a lot of strife. Company founder Phil Vischer wasn't the most business savvy, so having to head the newly exploding company Big Idea was proving to be a challenge. Business interests and personal interests were clashing as the newly emerging company was seeking growth by burying their Christian roots. Vischer didn't love this as he thought that they could grow through expanding into movies and TV shows instead. This divide was made extremely dangerous as a result of the crucial point they were at. This growth was important because, while Big Idea was a big company selling lots of videos, their revenue growth wasn't matching their increase in ambition. The management put in place by Vischer tackled this by spending a lot of money to make money. Vischer had his doubts about this plan, but they had more business experience than him, so who was he to judge, he thought. He himself was also looking to spend, as he got to planning a new studio estimated at $10 million. $4 million into this project though, it was revealed that they couldn't afford it, as its price ballooned to $17 million. No more studio. He would attempt to get into television. Nope. Okay, then movies have to create growth, right? They would work their way up with longer and longer episodes until being ready to make a movie. It was a perfect plan. A plan that LarryBoy and the Rumor Weed would be a part of. But a plan he didn't follow through with, as he thought that the overly long script written by Mike Naraki was too good to cut. The movie needed to start production now. While all this chaos was happening, the amount of artists doubled, their salaries doubled, marketing costs hit $13 million. With all this internal growth, tensions would grow even further. You would think that in spite of all their tension though, that this internal growth would lead to some results, but it didn't. In January 2000, sales were down 80% on projections that had been used to justify their upsizing. They simply couldn't afford the costs that had ballooned to $73 million at that point, so a loan had to be signed to stay afloat. A loan that within a month would fall out of compliance, leaving Big Idea with a $20 million burden if they wanted the company to continue existing. Action would need to be taken fast. Management was laid off. Workforce was downsized. Rich investors were pinged. All valiant efforts, but they were still failing to get the money they needed to even make it to the release day of their movie that was intended to save the company. They had one trick up their sleeves though: distributors' need for new content. They could drum out cash by pumping out new stuff. One of the things that was pumped out would be the LarryBoy animated series. This new animated series would be utilizing an extremely popular character and would be made in Flash, cutting down costs. The plan was foolproof. Sell a bunch of these LarryBoy episodes and make enough money to pay off their debts. How could it fail?
Once again, LarryBoy has saved the day!
The first episode of the show that was created as a part of Big Idea's master plan to escape bankruptcy was LarryBoy and the Angry Eyebrows. For these animated series episodes, brace yourself for the plot explanations. For the short length of the episodes, they are fairly meaty when it comes to the story. The episode starts off with a cow villain shooting slices of cheese at Bumbleberg citizens. LarryBoy comes in to save the day and learns that the cow villain is actually two vegetables motivated by hunger. It is then revealed that the real villain of the episode, Awful Alvin, has a camera set up in the sewers that allows him to see everything that is going on in Bumbleberg, including this little confrontation. His mission is to take over the town by unleashing anger-powered eyebrows. The episode puts this on hold though, as LarryBoy is unveiled to have taken up a job as a janitor at Bumbleberg's news organization, headed by Bob. Junior comes in with an old mushroom lady clamoring to show off her machine that turns hair into knitted apparel, thinking it would be a great story. Bob isn't impressed. The mushroom lady leaves with a feeling of disappointment, but her day is made even worse when Larry accidentally destroys the machine. The mushroom then goes on to become very angry and demands that Larry get a new one. Hold on to that piece of information. Alvin finally unleashes his angry eyebrows as LarryBoy is learning a lesson at his superhero community college. A lesson about not holding on to anger. This lesson ends up being very topical as one by one the Bumbleberg citizens' anger gets taken advantage of by the eyebrows spreading around town. Larry gets made aware of this by the mushroom lady who starts to attack him out of nowhere for his prior wrongdoing. LarryBoy was needed yet again, and so he left his janitorial duties to confront Alvin. The fight starts off seeming like LarryBoy is immune to anger and thus immune to the eyebrows, but he was proven wrong when Alvin pours chocolate into the Larrymobile. But just for a second, the LarryBoy we saw in the rest of the episode vanishes, as LarryBoy descends into becoming nothing but a pawn for Alvin. He remembers the story that he was taught in class about not holding on to anger. Internalizing this lesson, the eyebrow leaves him and everyone else who did as he did, letting go of anger. With the eyebrows still in the air, LarryBoy stops the threat for good by finessing them into the hair machine. The day was saved. Or was it? The mushroom still had the eyebrow. But then everyone celebrated her machines and things were fine. The episode is followed up by a highly entertaining short about a fly's attempt to ruin LarryBoy's day. As a first episode for an early 2000s Flash animated series, it honestly isn't too bad. The theme song is super catchy and holds to the standards of the rest of LarryBoy's previous outings, although the rest of the music can be a bit generic. For Flash animation, it manages to look pretty nice, holding true to the designs created by former Disney animator Tom Bancroft. It's really cool to see a slightly more fleshed out Bumbleberg. The first episode also manages to create a lot of ideas filled to the brim with potential. I mean, Bob as a news editor, a superhero community college filled with other super veggies, Larry as a janitor. Even within this episode that has to introduce all these concepts, they are still executed pretty well. Where the episode falters a bit comes in the humor and tone. The Awful Alvin episode adopts a far more childish sense of humor than what was in Fib and Rumor. I can't help but roll my eyes when the episode explains away its starting villains shooting cheese with them not thinking to eat the cheese. Or Alvin having an unexplained dance number. I understand that this is for kids, but with previous VeggieTales episodes, it felt like all ages could find humor, and that just isn't the case with this one. The episode also fails to effectively integrate its Christian themes. It felt as though they created an episode about not being mad, and then just tacked God onto it at the end. I'm not saying it should be more or less Christian, it just felt like the mentions of God were very out of place in a way they weren't in the classic LarryBoy episodes. It can make it at times feel almost like a parody of VeggieTales. Just to be clear, the problems I laid out definitely don't ruin the work, as I would say that all in all a highly entertaining episode was created, laying out the groundwork for many more LarryBoy stories. Seeing as these LarryBoy animated adventure episodes were sold episode by episode on home media, they had to add shorts to up the value proposition. I would say that the short in this episode was actually my favorite part. Last month I had an awful fly infestation, so seeing LarryBoy's fight with the fly felt extremely relatable. There was also great comedic timing and use of LarryBoy's gadgets such as his Larrymobile. It didn't feel like what I was watching was made for little kids only. Finally, ending out the short with his entire lawn getting destroyed and him getting squished really captures the essence of a fly encounter. Only a few months later, the next episode would be released, Leggo My Ego. Larry's day at the carnival is put on hold as a cotton candy machine malfunction starts coating the vegetables of Bumbleberg. LarryBoy is needed, and he tries his hardest, but getting caught up in his ego, the machine explodes and completely coats everyone in cotton candy. This leads the hungry vegetables from the last episode to be the real heroes of the day, as they eat all the cotton candy. With the day saved, the question is brought up of what caused the malfunction, and is promptly answered. The alchemist. He reveals himself and sprays LarryBoy with a mysterious spray. Not long after though, he gets caught, and on his way out, he lets LarryBoy know that he isn't a good superhero, leaving LarryBoy feeling deflated. It is then revealed that he is working with another villain, the Onion Mother Pearl. Yet another villain who is trying to take over Bumbleberg. Still feeling down, LarryBoy goes to superhero class and learns about how you shouldn't put others down to bring yourself up. This would be a lesson that he wouldn't internalize, as he falls into Mother Pearl's bait time and time again, repeatedly bringing people down. This leads to all the people he puts down shrinking, as it is revealed that the spray shrinks those that are made to feel lesser. LarryBoy doesn't know this, however, so he goes back home feeling really drab. Once home though, he quickly learns what happened as Alfred is shrunk. Through some analysis, they find out that it was the alchemist. LarryBoy would need to confront him, and that he did. LarryBoy arrives and is quickly met with an alter ego created by LarryBoy's negativity. Seeing the ramifications of his actions, LarryBoy remembers what he learned in class about not putting people down, and decides to bring others up. This defeats his alter ego and brings everyone back to their original size. Some further hijinks ensue, and the villains are defeated. The short that follows the episode is about LarryBoy trying to help two shops, a cake shop and a candle shop, at the same time on his birthday. This becomes harder and harder until eventually both shops shoot out their respective goods and it is revealed that everyone was throwing him a surprise party. Leggo My Ego is a massive improvement from the Angry Eyebrows episode in pretty much every conceivable way. The villains are far more entertaining, with a really great dynamic between the mom and son. It's almost like an early version of what would get presented in movies like Despicable Me. The Christian morals are also better integrated, having a Bible verse being told as if it's a textbook in class. Much better than the random God inserts of the last episode. Finally, the idea that LarryBoy feels down about himself is an interesting idea, as it mirrors the plot of his first appearance, except instead of feeling like he as Larry isn't good enough, he thinks that he as LarryBoy isn't good enough. That isn't to say that the episode is all great though. Some plot elements feel poorly written, such as the gassed ego machine that comes out of nowhere. The short that follows the episode also isn't as good as the Fly one, feeling a bit frustrating. It feels as if the citizens of Bumbleberg are both clueless and uncaring, which makes them very unlikable, even with the celebration at the end. All in all though, Leggo My Ego is definitely a step in the right direction. The question is, does the Yodelnapper keep up this upward trajectory? Larry wants to add a rare toy called Hula Heidi to his collection, so he goes to the store on opening day. As a way to ensure that he gets it, he pogos his way into the store the second that doors open, leading him to accidentally create a clay monster. Getting Hula Heidi would have to be put on hold to become LarryBoy and fight the monster. Defeating the monster would turn out to just require some saxophone playing. But in the time that he was spending fighting the monster, all the Hula Heidis would get snagged up. This would leave Larry sulking, but the angst would have to be put on hold, as the yodeling festival was that night. During the festival, one of the yodelers gets kidnapped, leaving LarryBoy to have a new mystery to solve. It is then revealed that the Yodelnapper Greta Von Gruesome is taking yodelers to her massive lair so that she can hear them yodel at any time for her entertainment, and if they don't comply, their fate would be pudding covered. The episode then cuts to LarryBoy learning about avoiding materialism, a lesson to hold on to for later, as a plan is created to disguise himself as a yodeler with a sheep companion to get kidnapped and save the other yodelers. This plan initially works, but while LarryBoy tries to explain the lesson he learned about materialism to Greta, they all get sent into a pit filled with Hula Heidis. Greta was the one who bought all of them. The yodelers work together to take them down, and once that threat is dealt with, LarryBoy takes down Greta. To celebrate this victory, the yodelers throw LarryBoy a celebration that is at first upended by the clay monster, but then he just dances to the music. The short for this episode involves LarryBoy fighting penguins for a fish dropped by a kid. In my opinion, Yodelnapper is the best episode of the animated series. The morals of avoiding materialism, while done before in Madame Blueberry, are always pertinent. Seeing as what is supposed to make VeggieTales different from other works is the messages they espouse, it is nice to see something more transgressive in this one. Avoiding materialism isn't exactly a revolutionary idea, but in a sea of other cartoons that are trying to sell you things, I find it very cool that they tell you to in fact not buy things to make you happy. You can say it's a bit hypocritical because of the amount of LarryBoy toys sold, but on its own it's a good message. The episode's absurd premise is also highly entertaining. The idea of someone who collects yodelers is such a delightful way to tell a story about things not making you happy. It truly takes advantage of the superhero premise. There's also some really funny gags in this one, like Bob the Tomato getting thrown at Larry when he's bombing as a yodeler. Not the first time he's yodeled, by the way. I wouldn't say the episode is perfect, however, as Larry creating the villain in the beginning is kind of annoying, and the short is pretty much just a worse version of the Fly short. These problems are very minor though, in an episode that otherwise totally meets the potential that a LarryBoy 2D animated series has. To follow this one up would be tough. Could they do it with the good, the bad, and the ugly? Greta and Alvin return to unleash flying pigs on LarryBoy, and Dark Crow comes to assist against these pigs. While Dark Crow and LarryBoy fight this distraction, Greta and Alvin go on their way to steal goop from some scientists. Dark Crow attempts to stop them, but LarryBoy gets in the way. As the two heroes are in class learning about working together, a new tension rises from the mistake made by LarryBoy, a tension that carries on to their next battle against Alvin and Greta at the museum in which they try out an over-easy egg converter. LarryBoy and Dark Crow's bickering leads Vicky to get kidnapped. A new plan would need to be devised to save her, involving a robot made by the scientists, although yet again they would butt heads and fail, except this time it seemed that they weren't going to get another shot. Right as they were about to meet their ends, they noticed that Greta and Alvin not working together prevented them from winning. This reminds them of what they learned in class about working together, so they decide to try out teamwork. Teamwork saves the day, and Larry goes out with Vicky. The short involves Lemon Twist and Electromelon making a mess at the amusement park and fighting about who should clean it up. This escalates until the whole park is ruined, and Larry has to put them in check. The park gets cleaned. This one starts out strong, but quickly proves itself to be the weakest of the bunch. Gags like Bob putting his paper to bed and pigs shooting bacon are pretty humorous, but the humor quickly fades into frustration as easily avoidable mistakes like LarryBoy plugging in the villain's machine get made again and again. The episode tries to frame Dark Crow being frustrated with LarryBoy as failing to work together, but it's hard not to sympathize with him. When LarryBoy tries to help, he makes things worse, so it makes sense that Dark Crow wouldn't want to continue working together. Realizing where the viewer's sympathies may lie, they make Dark Crow cartoonish in his aversion to working with LarryBoy in ways that just don't make sense. This isn't even to mention how played out the message of teamwork in superhero media is. I would try to talk more about other things that go on, but their bickering really is the whole episode, and it's hard to watch. The short doesn't make up for the episode either, as it is also extremely frustrating. Watching a couple super vegetables destroying a park as a result of their incompetence does not make for compelling entertainment. As a finale for the LarryBoy animated series, it leaves a sour taste in the mouth. It doesn't ruin the series, but it does hurt to have 1 out of the 4 episodes being a complete dud. In spite of the last episode, this cartoon series had its moments and was definitely deserving of its spot in the LarryBoy canon. People of the time, however, did not agree. The general sentiment was that it looked cheap and that it looked like what Cartoon Network was showing for free. This cartoon would not be the savior that it was created to be. In a seemingly symbolic moment, the last LarryBoy appearance before the demise of Big Idea as an independent company was a Jonah outtake in which he hits the windshield of a car that is crashing down a hill, a true representation of how the LarryBoy animated series was quickly shot out as a last-ditch effort to save their fledgling company. A detail I left out in the history of their business dealings was the ongoing lawsuit they had going on. Distributor Lyric Entertainment and Big Idea had been working for a couple years without a proper contract. Just a non-binding agreement that if the main guy Dick Leach left or sold Lyric, they would walk away. This would become very pertinent when Lyric was sold to HIT, a company that wanted to own all the properties they worked with. Big Idea, not wanting that fate for VeggieTales, decided to switch to being distributed by WEA. 10 days later, HIT followed suit for abandoning the contract. The non-binding contract. This would be made much worse by the fact that Dick Leach had just died, so they had no one to defend them. A defense that they desperately needed, as they got incinerated in the courts. The battle was so devastating that it sank the already sinking ship of Big Idea, leading them to get bought out by classic media. In the midst of all this chaos, LarryBoy lay dormant for years, but against all odds, it was brought back to life in LarryBoy and the Bad Apple. An apple who wants to take over Bumbleberg tempts the town's citizens one by one to overindulge, including LarryBoy. Right as she sets up shop on her ultimate temptation to end all temptations, LarryBoy comes to his senses and confronts the apple. An epic battle between the apple, LarryBoy, and the citizens of Bumbleberg ensues. In the end, she is defeated and the day is saved. Following what film director Tim Hodge considered a failed attempt, the animated series, the creators of Bad Apple would have to relearn how to make LarryBoy in 3D, a task made extra difficult by Phil Vischer not returning to write, and an entirely different creation process than had come before. VeggieTales now needed to be produced fast and cheap. No proto-movies this time. The result of this transition was mountains of rewrites, re-edits, relightings, and even a recasting. The original voice actor for the Bad Apple wasn't received well by test audiences, so a new one had to come in. one that managed to portray a character that sounded appealing, yet dangerous. They also had to accept the challenge of recreating a scene from a trailer they made a year prior, a task made extremely difficult by the differences in team members and animation software, but a task that was well worth it. The end result sets the mood perfectly. One thing you may have noticed watching that scene is a noticeable change in tone from the previous 3D LarryBoy outings. Unlike Rumorweed and Fib, this one would be based on a mix of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and general Batman stories, as opposed to the Tim Burton Batman inspirations of the past. In order to make the episode more Spider-Man compatible, the buildings were forced to be made taller and more present. While the town may have been made to be grander, it wasn't all a step up. Textures are noticeably less detailed, and the camera angles less cinematic in this one as compared to Rumorweed. You can also see some clear cost-cutting measures, like the phone model being from Minnesota Cuke, the camera model being from the drawing episode, and the jump rope model being from Sumo of the Opera. Nothing wrong with reusing models, but something worth noting. What's also worth noting is the parts that do shine, like the beautifully painted scenery. I really just want to pause and admire. Far and away the best drawing scene in LarryBoy yet. Also far and away the most bright and colorful painted scenery yet. Fitting for an episode that is much more lighthearted than Fib and Rumor. The difference in tone is made apparent by the return of the VeggieTales theme and countertop set. The countertop sequence has a great callback to Fib, showcasing Larry being ahead of Bob technologically with his methods of communication. Except last time it was with emails, and this time it is with text messages. The tonal difference is also made clear with the changes done behind the scenes. Originally, they were supposed to use a chainsaw to take down the webs, but that was canned. Originally, LarryBoy was supposed to narrowly escape getting impaled by a pitchfork. Canned as well. Okay, so those things probably wouldn't ever have made it into a LarryBoy episode, but I thought they were worth a mention. The music of the episode isn't really of much note, with the background music being pretty forgettable, and the theme song being the weakest so far in LarryBoy history. That's not to say that the theme song is bad, it just fails to meet the high standards of LarryBoy. What does meet the high standards of LarryBoy is the humor, even if it is more subtle.
Look out! Temptation! Did you know chocolate was invented by the Mayans?
While LarryBoy and the Bad Apple might not have been as memorable or impactful as the Fib or Rumor, it still manages to be a worthy continuation of the franchise. Switching up to being a spoof of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was brilliant, and the villain was an excellent vehicle for the morality story they were trying to tell, if a bit on the nose. Big Idea seemed to think highly of this one too, considering they would release loads of merchandise and 2 games. The PS2 one being a fairly simple 3D platformer akin to many movie tie-in games of the time, and the GBA one being an extremely simple Mario vs. Donkey Kong type game. These games didn't have that large of an impact, but one thing of note about the GBA game in particular is that it was one of the last GBA games sold new, having been available just a couple years ago. Following the release of LarryBoy and the Bad Apple, LarryBoy would lay dormant for a long time. 6 years in fact. The year it came back would be the same year that Big Idea's tumultuous history would accelerate into insanity. In the next episode of the complete history of LarryBoy, I'll go over the media that encompassed an era that wouldn't stay stable for a second. An era with a direct-to-DVD episode, a reboot, and another reboot. Thanks for watching.